Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. Emma stood at the edge of the rooftop terrace, her fingers trembling as she gripped the cold metal railing. The city lights below blurred through her tears, each one representing a life that seemed to have it figured out, while hers was falling apart. The eviction notice in her pocket felt heavier than lead. Its words burned into her memory. 3 days. That's all she had left before she and her younger sister Sophie would be on the streets. The medical bills from Sophie's surgery had drained every penny of their parents' life insurance, and now even their childhood home was slipping away. The corporate party behind her continued in full swing, the sound of champagne glasses clinking and polite laughter drifting through the glass doors. She shouldn't even be here. Her friend Madison, who worked in the building, had snuck her in, promising that networking at these events could lead to opportunities. But Emma felt like a fraud in her borrowed dress, pretending she belonged among these executives and entrepreneurs who spent more on a single dinner than she made in a month. Taking a deep breath, she turned to go back inside when she collided with someone stepping out onto the terrace. The man's whiskey tumbler shattered on the ground, amber liquid splashing across his expensive Italian shoes. Emma's heart sank as she looked up into the darkest eyes she'd ever seen. Alexander Cross. She recognized him immediately from the business magazines Madison was always reading. Billionaire tech mogul, notorious workaholic, and according to the tabloids, the most eligible bachelor in the city. "I'm so sorry," Emma stammered, dropping to her knees to pick up the glass shards. A sharp edge sliced her palm, and she winced as blood welled up from the cut. Strong hands suddenly gripped her wrists, pulling her to her feet. Alexander's expression was unreadable as he examined her injured hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. Without a word, he pulled out a pristine white handkerchief and wrapped it around her palm. "Leave the glass," he commanded, his voice deep and controlled. "The staff will handle it." He studied her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You don't belong here." It wasn't a question. Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "Is it that obvious?" she asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The shoes," he said simply. "Designer dress, department store shoes. You're trying to fit in, but something tells me that's not why you're really here." Before Emma could respond, the terrace door burst open. A woman in a stunning red gown stormed out, her perfectly manicured nails glinting like claws. "Alexander, there you are. We need to talk about the wedding arrangements. Mother insists on the plaza, but I think the Rainbow Room would be far more intimate." Victoria Pemberton, Alexander's supposed fiancée, according to every gossip column in the city. But the look of barely controlled frustration on Alexander's face told a different story. "Victoria, we've discussed this," he said coldly. "There will be no wedding." Victoria laughed, a sharp sound like breaking crystal. "Don't be ridiculous. Our families have been planning this merger for years. You need this marriage to secure the Morrison Industries deal, and you know it." She noticed Emma then, her eyes narrowing to slits. "And who is this? The help?" Something dangerous flashed in Alexander's eyes. He moved closer to Emma, his hand settling possessively on her lower back. "This is Emma," he said smoothly, though he couldn't possibly know her name. "My fiancée." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Emma's mouth fell open in shock, but Alexander's grip tightened in warning. Victoria's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You're what?" she shrieked. "This is absurd. You can't just—" But Alexander was already guiding Emma toward the door. "If you'll excuse us, Victoria, we were just leaving." He leaned close to Emma's ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Play along," he whispered. "I'll make it worth your while." They moved through the party like a force of nature, Alexander's presence parting the crowd effortlessly. Emma's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. As they waited for the elevator, she finally found her voice. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "I don't even know you!" The elevator doors slid open, and he guided her inside. Once the doors closed, he released her and stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair. "I need a wife," he said bluntly. "Not a real one. Just someone to play the part for 1 year. In exchange, I'm prepared to offer you $1 million. Emma laughed, certain this was some kind of joke. "You're insane." But Alexander's expression remained deadly serious. "The Morrison Industries deal requires me to be married. It's an old-fashioned company, family values and all that. Victoria's family has been pushing for our union because they want access to my connections. But I'd rather make a business arrangement with someone who has no ulterior motives." The elevator descended in silence as Emma tried to wrap her mind around his proposition. $1 million would solve everything. Sophie's medical bills, the mortgage, college tuition, everything. But pretend to be married to this stranger for a year? "Why me?" she asked finally. Alexander studied her with those penetrating eyes. "Because you're desperate enough to say yes, and unknown enough that no one will question the story we create." His brutal honesty should have offended her, but instead, she found it refreshing. The elevator opened into an underground parking garage where a sleek black Bentley waited. Alexander's driver held the door open, his face professionally blank, as if his employer regularly collected random women from parties. Emma hesitated on the threshold of a decision that would change everything. $1 million. Freedom from debt. Security for Sophie. All she had to do was lie to the world for 12 months. She slid into the leather seat, her borrowed dress rustling against the soft interior. Alexander settled beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "Before you make your decision," he said as the car glided into traffic, "you should know what you're getting into. This won't be some simple charade. We'll need to live together, attend public events, convince my board of directors, my family, and the media that our relationship is genuine." Emma watched the city blur past the tinted windows. "And what about other expectations?" she asked carefully. Alexander's jaw tightened. "This is strictly business. You'll have your own room, your privacy. I'm not interested in anything beyond the performance." There was something in his tone that suggested a deeper story, but Emma didn't press. "I have conditions," she said suddenly, surprising herself with her boldness. Alexander raised an eyebrow. "You're negotiating?" Emma turned to face him fully. "You said it yourself. I'm desperate. But I'm not stupid. If I'm going to do this, I need guarantees." A spark of something that might have been respect flashed in his eyes. "Go on." "First," Emma began, her voice growing stronger, "my sister Sophie comes with me. She's 17, and I'm her legal guardian. I won't leave her alone." Alexander considered this. "Done." The penthouse has 5 bedrooms. Emma's heart skipped. He was actually taking her seriously. "Second," she continued, "I want half the money up front. The other half when the year is complete." Alexander's expression didn't change. "Reasonable." "What's the third condition?" This was the one that mattered most, the one that would determine if she could really go through with this. "When this ends, we part as friends. No legal complications. No damage to either of our reputations. You help me establish a cover story for afterward, something that explains our separation without making me look like a gold digger or a discarded toy." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Emma held her breath. "You've thought this through," he said finally. "Most people would have just jumped at the money." Emma's chin lifted. "I've learned that if something seems too good to be true, it usually is. I want to know exactly what I'm signing up for. The car pulled up to a gleaming tower that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night sky. "Come up," Alexander said. "See the place. Meet my lawyer. Review the contract. If you're not comfortable with anything, you can walk away. No questions asked." The penthouse was beyond anything Emma had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city. Modern art adorned the walls, and every surface spoke of understated wealth. But it felt cold, like a museum rather than a home. Alexander's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Chen, was already waiting with a stack of documents. "Miss?" Richard prompted. "Harper," Emma supplied. "Emma Harper." Richard's fingers flew across his tablet, no doubt already beginning a background check. "The contract is quite straightforward," he began, but Emma held up her hand. "I'd like to read it myself, if you don't mind." Both men looked surprised, but Richard slid the documents across the marble counter. Emma read every line, asked questions about clauses she didn't understand, and requested several amendments. Alexander watched her with an unreadable expression, occasionally answering questions about practical arrangements. When she finally reached the end, she set down the pen. "There's one more thing," she said. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. "You said 3 conditions." Emma met his gaze steadily. "This is still part of the 3rd. I want it in writing that if either of us develops genuine feelings during this arrangement, we can terminate the contract early with no financial penalties to either party." Richard coughed discreetly. "That's highly unusual, Miss Harper." But Alexander held up his hand. "Add it," he instructed. Emma saw something flicker in his expression, gone too quickly to identify. "Why that clause?" he asked quietly. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Because lies have a way of becoming truth, and I want us both to have an exit strategy if things get complicated." The lawyer made the amendments, and soon 3 copies of the contract lay before them. Alexander signed first, his signature bold and decisive. Emma took the pen with a steady hand, but inside, her heart was racing. 1 year. $1 million. One elaborate deception that would either solve all her problems or destroy her completely. As her pen touched the paper, she caught Alexander watching her with an intensity that made her shiver. There was something he wasn't telling her, some reason beyond business that had driven him to this desperate measure. But then again, she had her own secrets, her own reasons for being willing to sell her truth for a year. The next morning arrived with a flurry of activity that made Emma's head spin. A team of stylists descended upon her cramped apartment before dawn, armed with garment bags, shoe boxes, and enough makeup to stock a department store. Sophie sat on the couch, mouth agape, as their modest living room transformed into a makeshift salon. "Emma, what is happening?" Sophie whispered, clutching her coffee mug like a lifeline. Emma had told her sister the basics the night before, leaving out the more complicated emotions swirling in her chest. Sophie had been skeptical, but ultimately supportive, especially when Emma explained that the arrangement would pay for her college education and ensure they kept their home. "We're creating a backstory," announced Miranda, the lead stylist, a whirlwind of efficiency and designer heels. "Mr. Cross has instructed us to craft an image that's believable. You're to be a successful art curator who caught his eye at a gallery opening 6 months ago. You've been dating secretly to avoid media attention." She held up a sophisticated navy dress. "This is what you wore when you first met him." Emma fingered the expensive fabric, noting the price tag had been removed. This single dress probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. "An art curator?" she asked. Miranda nodded briskly. "You have a master's degree from Columbia, spent 2 years working at the Guggenheim, and now run a small but exclusive gallery in Soho. Don't worry, we've created an entire digital footprint to support this, By noon today, anyone searching for Emma Harper will find a carefully curated professional history. The transformation was remarkable. Emma's wild curls were tamed into elegant waves, her face subtly enhanced with makeup that made her look polished, but natural. The clothes were understated but expensive, the kind of quality that whispered rather than shouted wealth. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Alexander arrived at precisely 11 o'clock, looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit. His eyes swept over her appearance with approval before landing on Sophie. "You must be the sister," he said, extending his hand. "Sophie, right?" Sophie shook his hand warily. "And you're the guy fake marrying my sister for $1 million. Alexander's lips twitched. Accurately summarized, the movers arrived shortly after, efficiently packing what few belongings Emma and Sophie wanted to take to the penthouse. Most of their furniture would stay, the apartment maintained as part of the cover story. If anyone investigated, they would find evidence of Emma's supposed successful career, complete with fabricated bank statements showing steady income from her non-existent gallery. The ride to the penthouse was quiet. Sophie stared out the window, while Emma reviewed the dossier Miranda had prepared. Her fictional life was impressively detailed, including past relationships, education history, and even a collection of art reviews she'd supposedly written for various publications. "You'll need to memorize all of this," Alexander said quietly. "My mother has a private investigator on retainer. She'll dig into your background the moment she hears about our engagement." Emma looked up from the papers. "Your mother doesn't know about this." Alexander's expression darkened. "My family will be informed at dinner tomorrow night. I suggest you prepare yourself. Eleanor Cross doesn't approve of anyone easily, especially women who get involved with her son." The warning in his tone was clear. The penthouse felt different in daylight. Sun streamed through the massive windows, warming the sterile spaces. Sophie immediately gravitated toward the library, her eyes lighting up at the walls of books. "This is incredible," she breathed. Alexander watched her with an unreadable expression. "You're welcome to use anything in the penthouse," he told her. "Consider it your home for the duration of our arrangement." Emma spent the afternoon studying her new identity, while Alexander worked in his home office. Occasionally, she would catch him watching her from the doorway, but he would quickly retreat when their eyes met. There was a tension between them, an awareness that made the air feel charged. That evening, he joined them for dinner, a casual meal that Sophie had insisted on cooking. "So," Sophie said, pointing her fork at Alexander, "what's your deal? Why does a billionaire need a fake wife?" Emma nearly choked on her wine. "Sophie," but Alexander seemed amused rather than offended. "Fair question. The simple answer is that the business world still operates on outdated principles. The Morrison board believes a married man is more stable, more trustworthy. Their contracts are worth $2 billion to my company." Sophie considered this. "And the complicated answer?" Alexander's eyes flickered to Emma. "The complicated answer is that I've learned real relationships come with expectations and vulnerabilities I'm not willing to accept." There was pain hidden beneath his words, old wounds that hadn't healed. Emma found herself wanting to know more, to understand what had made him so guarded. After dinner, Sophie retreated to her room to video chat with friends, leaving Emma and Alexander alone on the terrace. The city sparkled below them, a tapestry of lights and lives. "Tell me about your parents," Alexander said suddenly. Emma stiffened. This wasn't part of their agreed-upon story. "They died 2 years ago," she said quietly. "Car accident, black ice on the highway." She felt rather than saw him move closer. "I'm sorry. That must have been devastating." Emma wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. "Sophie was only 15. I had to drop out of my actual master's program to take care of her. Not quite the Columbia degree in your fictional biography. She attempted a laugh, but it came out brittle. Alexander was quiet for a moment, then shrugged out of his suit jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The gesture was unexpectedly gentle. "My father died when I was 22, he said, his voice low. Heart attack at his desk. He literally worked himself to death. My mother never recovered from losing him. She channels her grief into controlling every aspect of my life she can reach." The vulnerability in his confession made Emma turn to look at him. In the soft light from the apartment, he looked younger, less armored. "Is that why you're really doing this?" she asked. "To get her off your back about marriage?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Partially, but also because Victoria's family has been maneuvering for years to force a merger through marriage. Her father holds enough board seats to make my life difficult if I don't find an alternative soon." He turned to face her fully. "You're my escape route, Emma, and I'm yours." The weight of their mutual desperation hung between them. Emma pulled his jacket tighter around herself, breathing in the subtle scent of his cologne. "We should establish ground rules," she said, "beyond what's in the contract." "Day-to-day things," Alexander nodded. "Such as?" "Public displays of affection," Emma began. "What's expected?" Alexander considered this. "Hand-holding at events. The occasional kiss for cameras. Nothing you're uncomfortable with." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "And in private?" His eyes darkened slightly. "In private, we maintain appropriate boundaries. Separate bedrooms, separate lives. We're roommates playing a part, nothing more." The next evening, Emma stood before the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the elegant black cocktail dress Miranda had selected for dinner with Alexander's mother. Her hand shook slightly as she fastened the diamond earrings Alexander had presented her with that morning. "They need to believe you belong in my world," he'd said, his fingers brushing her neck as he'd helped with the clasp. Sophie knocked and entered, whistling low. "You look like a movie star." Emma managed a weak smile. "I feel like I'm going to throw up." Sophie moved behind her, resting her chin on Emma's shoulder as they looked at their reflections. "You're doing this for us," Sophie said quietly. "But also, that man looks at you like you're something special." "Maybe this doesn't have to be as fake as you think." Before Emma could respond, Alexander appeared in the doorway. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame. His eyes traveled slowly from her heels to her face, something hungry flickering in their depths before he controlled it. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Emma's pulse quickened. "Thank you. You clean up well yourself." The restaurant Alexander had chosen was impossibly elegant, the kind of place where the prices weren't listed on the menu. Eleanor Cross was already seated when they arrived, her silver hair styled in a severe chignon, her posture rigid with disapproval. Her eyes, the same dark shade as her son's, dissected Emma with surgical precision. "Mother," Alexander said, kissing her cheek before pulling out Emma's chair. "This is Emma Harper, my fiancée." Eleanor's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. "Fiancé? How interesting. And here I thought you were seeing Victoria Pemberton." Alexander's hand found Emma's on the table, his thumb tracing soothing circles on her wrist. "Victoria and I were never together, despite what she may have told you." Eleanor turned her attention to Emma. "Miss Harper, is it? Tell me about yourself. Alexander has been remarkably secretive about your relationship." Emma drew on everything she'd memorized, weaving the fictional narrative with enough truth to make it believable. She spoke about art with genuine passion, drawing on museum visits from her childhood. Eleanor's questions were sharp, probing for weaknesses, but Emma held her ground. And your family? Eleanor asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. My parents passed away 2 years ago, Emma said steadily. I have a younger sister who lives with me. With us, she corrected, glancing at Alexander. Eleanor's lips thinned. How convenient. An orphan with no family to investigate. Mother, Alexander's voice carried a warning, but Emma squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his touch. I understand your concern, Mrs. Cross. Your son is exceptional, and you want to protect him. But I love Alexander for who he is, not what he has. I hope in time you'll see that. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected, she said finally. No, I imagine not, Emma replied. But then again, Alexander has always defied expectations, hasn't he? A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. Indeed he has. The rest of the dinner passed with less hostility, though Eleanor remained watchful. As they prepared to leave, she pulled Emma aside while Alexander retrieved their coats. I don't know what game you're playing, Eleanor said quietly, but I know my son. He doesn't do anything without reason. If you hurt him, there isn't a place on earth you can hide from me. Emma met her gaze directly. If I hurt him, I'll deserve whatever you do to me. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, perhaps surprised by Emma's directness. Then she nodded once, a gesture that might have been approval or warning. In the car afterward, Alexander was quiet. Emma could feel tension radiating from him like heat. That went better than expected, she ventured. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. She'll have you investigated 6 ways to Sunday by morning. The identity will hold up, though, right? Emma asked anxiously. Alexander nodded. Richard is thorough, but Mother won't stop at paperwork. She'll test you, push boundaries, try to catch you in lies. Emma lifted her chin. Then I'll have to be careful not to get caught. Back at the penthouse, they found Sophie asleep on the couch, textbooks scattered around her. Alexander's expression softened as he watched Emma gently wake her sister and guide her to bed. She's lucky to have you, he said when Emma returned. We're lucky to have each other, Emma corrected. It's been just the 2 of us for a while now. They stood awkwardly in the living room, the events of the evening creating a strange intimacy between them. Thank you, Alexander said suddenly, for tonight, for handling my mother with such grace. Emma shrugged. I've dealt with difficult people before, though none quite as intimidating as Eleanor Cross. Alexander moved closer, and Emma's breath caught. You were magnificent, he said softly. The way you stood up to her. Not many people do that. For a moment, they stood frozen, the space between them charged with possibility. Then Alexander stepped back, clearing his throat. We should get some rest. Tomorrow, the announcement goes public. Emma nodded, disappointed and relieved in equal measure. As she headed to her room, Alexander called after her. Emma, she turned, the 3rd condition in your contract. About developing feelings. Did you add that for your protection or mine? Emma considered her answer carefully. Maybe both, she said finally. Good night, Alexander. She didn't wait for his response, fleeing to the safety of her room. But sleep eluded her as she replayed the evening. The way Alexander's touch had grounded her, the flash of pride in his eyes when she'd faced down his mother. This was supposed to be simple, a business arrangement. But nothing about Alexander Cross was simple. The next morning, Emma woke to find her phone exploding with notifications. The announcement had indeed gone public. Billionaire Alexander Cross engaged to art curator Emma Harper, screamed the headlines. Photos from various events had been doctored to include her, their fictional relationship backdated with impressive skill. Miranda arrived early with a team to prepare Emma for the inevitable paparazzi assault. Remember, Miranda instructed, you're confident, but not arrogant. Happy, but not giddy. You've been together 6 months, so the initial infatuation has settled into something deeper. She handed Emma a cup of coffee and a tablet showing social media reactions. Most were positive, though Victoria Pemberton had posted a cryptic message about wolves in sheep's clothing. Alexander appeared, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that somehow looked just as expensive as his suits. "Ready for your first performance?" he asked. Emma took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." He held out his hand. "Then let's give them a show." They walked out of the building together, Alexander's arm protectively around Emma's waist as photographers swarmed. Questions flew at them from all directions. "How did you meet? When's the wedding? What does your family think, Emma?" Alexander fielded questions with practiced ease, while Emma smiled and leaned into him, playing the part of the besotted fiancé. Then a reporter pushed forward with a nasty smile. "Miss Harper, how does it feel to go from nobody to somebody overnight? And what happened to your last boyfriend, David Chen? He seems to have vanished from social media right around the time you supposedly met Mr. Cross." Emma's blood ran cold. There was no David Chen in her real history, but apparently there was in her fictional one. She had no idea how to respond. Alexander felt Emma tense beside him and smoothly intervened. "David and Emma parted amicably before we met. He's actually working abroad now, which is why his social media presence has diminished. We wish him nothing but the best." His voice carried just enough authority to shut down further questions on the topic. He guided Emma toward the waiting car, whispering in her ear to any observers looking like sweet nothings, but actually saying, "David Chen, art dealer, Tokyo, 2-year relationship, ended 7 months ago." Once safely in the car, Emma released a shaky breath. "That was terrifying. How did you know about David?" Alexander pulled out his phone, showing her a detailed file. "I memorized your fictional history too. We're partners in this, Emma. I won't let you fail." The intensity in his voice made her stomach flutter. This was supposed to be purely business, but the way he'd protected her felt like something more. They spent the rest of the day making strategic appearances, a casual lunch at a trendy bistro where they were sure to be photographed, a visit to an art gallery where Emma could demonstrate her supposed expertise. She found herself relaxing into the role, especially when Alexander seemed genuinely interested in her opinions about the paintings. "You really know your art," he said, surprised, as she explained the technique behind a particularly complex piece. "I might not have a Columbia degree, but I've loved art since I was little," Emma admitted. "My mom was a Sunday painter. She taught me to see the story behind every brushstroke." Alexander studied her with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. "Tell me more about her." As they moved through the gallery, Emma found herself sharing real memories, forgetting for a moment that this was all pretend. That evening, they attended a charity gala, their first major public appearance as a couple. Emma wore a stunning burgundy gown that Alexander had personally selected. "You have good taste," she said, as he helped her with her necklace, his fingers brushing against her neck and sending shivers down her spine. "You make it easy," he replied, his voice rougher than usual. The ballroom was filled with the city's elite, all eager to get a glimpse of Alexander Cross's mysterious fiancée. They moved through the crowd like dancers, Alexander always knowing exactly when to touch her arm, when to lean in close, when to laugh at her comments. To anyone watching, they looked perfectly in love. Victoria Pemberton made her appearance halfway through the evening, wearing a dress designed to draw every eye. She sauntered over, champagne flute in hand, malice in her smile. "Emma, darling, don't you look quaint?" Emma smiled sweetly. "Victoria, how lovely. That's quite a dress. Very bold." Victoria's eyes narrowed at the subtle insult. "I hope you know what you're getting into," Victoria said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Alexander can be quite demanding. He goes through assistants like tissue paper." I can't imagine he'll be any different with wives. Alexander's hand tightened on Emma's waist, but before he could respond, Emma laughed lightly. Oh, Victoria, you misunderstand. I'm not his assistant, and I won't be just his wife. I'm his partner. There's a difference, though I wouldn't expect you to understand that. She turned to Alexander with a look of such genuine adoration that even she almost believed it. Dance with me? Alexander led her onto the dance floor, pulling her close as a slow song began. That was impressive, he murmured against her ear. Victoria's been a thorn in my side for years. Emma looked up at him. Nobody talks about you that way when I'm around. Fake fiancé or not, I've got your back. Something shifted in Alexander's expression. His hand splayed across her back, drawing her closer until their bodies were perfectly aligned. Careful, Emma. You almost sound like you care. The words were teasing, but his eyes were serious. Maybe I do, she whispered, then caught herself. I mean, we're partners. Partners look out for each other. The song ended, but Alexander didn't release her immediately. They stood frozen on the dance floor, other couples moving around them, lost in a moment that felt all too real. Finally, someone cleared their throat nearby, breaking the spell. Richard Chen stood there, looking apologetic. Mr. Cross, there's an urgent call from Tokyo. Alexander's expression immediately shifted to business mode. He excused himself, leaving Emma to navigate the party alone. She managed well enough, making small talk with other guests, but she felt his absence like a physical thing. When he returned 20 minutes later, his face was grim. We need to leave, he said quietly. In the car, he explained, there's been an issue with the Morrison deal. They want to meet you, this weekend, in their family home in the Hamptons. Emma's stomach dropped, but I've only been preparing for a few days. What if I mess up? Alexander took her hand, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in a gesture that was becoming familiar. You won't mess up. You've already proven you can handle whatever comes your way. My mother, Victoria, the media circus. The Morrisons will be easy compared to that. Emma wasn't convinced, but she nodded anyway. Back at the penthouse, Sophie was waiting up, eager to hear about the gala. As Emma recounted the evening, carefully editing out the moments that had felt too personal, she noticed Alexander watching from the doorway. When their eyes met, he smiled slightly before disappearing into his office. Sophie noticed too. He really cares about you, she said. It's just an act, Soph. We're both playing parts, Emma insisted, but Sophie shook her head. I've seen acting. That's not what this is, at least not anymore. Before Emma could argue, Sophie hugged her good night and headed to bed, leaving Emma alone with her confused thoughts. She found Alexander on the terrace, a glass of scotch in hand, staring out at the city. Couldn't sleep either, he asked without turning. Emma joined him at the railing. Too keyed up, I guess. Tonight was intense. Alexander nodded slowly. You handled everything perfectly. You're a natural at this. Or maybe I'm just a good liar, Emma said, a bitter edge to her voice. Alexander turned to face her. No, you're one of the most honest people I've ever met. Even when you're playing a part, there's truth in it. That's why people believe us. Emma looked up at him, struck by the sincerity in his voice. Sometimes I forget what's real and what's not, she admitted. What feels real to you? Alexander asked, moving closer. Emma's heart raced as she looked into his eyes. This, she whispered. Right now. You and me, without the cameras and the audience. This feels real. Alexander reached up, his hand cupping her cheek. Emma. But before he could finish, a sharp ring cut through the moment. His phone. The Morrison lawyers in Tokyo again. Frustrated, Alexander answered, switching immediately into business mode. Emma watched him pace, speaking in clipped tones about contracts and clauses, and realized this was his reality. Deals and negotiations, and an empire to run. She was just a temporary addition, a solution to a problem. The moment on the terrace had been an anomaly, nothing more. The trip to the Hamptons required extensive preparation. Miranda arrived with a weekend's worth of appropriate clothing, each outfit carefully selected to project the right image. Casual wealth, understated elegance, the kind of woman who belonged in Alexander Cross's world. Emma practiced conversations with Richard, learning about Alexander's business dealings, his history with the Morrison family, the delicate negotiations that hinged on this meeting. James Morrison is traditional, Richard explained. He believes in family values, stability, legacy. His wife Patricia comes from old money. She'll be evaluating you as potential mother material for future Cross heirs. Emma nearly choked on her coffee. Children? We haven't even discussed that part of the story. Alexander entered the room, having overheard. We want two, a boy and a girl, traditional names. We'll raise them here in the city but spend summers in the Hamptons. He said it so matter-of-factly that for a moment Emma could picture it. Little dark-haired children with Alexander's intense eyes, and maybe her smile. The thought was dangerous. The drive to the Hamptons was quiet, both of them lost in preparation for the performance ahead. The Morrison estate was breathtaking, a massive colonial mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and overlooking the ocean. James and Patricia Morrison greeted them warmly, though Emma could feel the assessment beginning immediately. Emma, dear, Alexander tells us you're in the art world, Patricia said, as she led them through the house. You must see our collection. James has been acquiring pieces for decades. The collection was impressive, and Emma found herself genuinely enjoying discussing the works with James, who was passionate and knowledgeable. Your fiancée has excellent taste, Alexander, James said approvingly. Where did you find her? Alexander's arm slipped around Emma's waist. She found me, actually. Told me off for not understanding a Basquiat at a gallery opening. I was intrigued by anyone brave enough to lecture me about art. Emma played along, adding details that felt natural. He was trying to impress some clients by pretending he understood abstract expressionism. I couldn't let him embarrass himself. The Morrisons laughed, charmed by the story. Patricia pulled Emma aside while the men discussed business. You're not what I expected, Patricia said, echoing Eleanor Cross's words. Alexander has always dated a certain type, ambitious, cold, suitable for mergers rather than marriages. You're different. Emma chose honesty, or at least a version of it. I never expected Alexander either, but sometimes the best things in life are the ones you don't see coming. Patricia smiled warmly. I couldn't agree more. James and I met when I was waitressing to pay for college. His parents were horrified. But 40 years and 3 children later, here we are. She studied Emma carefully. You love him. It wasn't a question, and Emma realized with a start that she couldn't deny it. Not because of their charade, but because somewhere along the way, it had become true. That evening, dinner was an elaborate affair, with multiple courses and carefully orchestrated conversation. Emma found herself seated between James and his eldest son, Thomas, who ran the European division of Morrison Industries. Thomas was charming, but probing, asking subtle questions designed to trip her up. But Emma had learned from the best, watching Alexander navigate similar waters with ease. So, Emma, Thomas said during the fish course, Alexander mentioned you've been together 6 months, but no one seems to have known about it. That's quite a feat in his social circle. Emma smiled, having prepared for this. We wanted to be sure about each other before dealing with public scrutiny. Alexander's previous relationships taught him the value of privacy. And you weren't bothered by the secrecy? Thomas pressed. Emma glanced at Alexander, who was deep in conversation with James. I was relieved by it, actually. It meant what we had was real, not performance. The irony of her words wasn't lost on her. Everything about their relationship was performance, except for these dangerous moments when it felt like something more. After dinner, Patricia suggested a walk on the beach. Alexander took Emma's hand as they strolled along the shoreline, the Morrisons a few paces ahead. The moonlight turned the waves silver, and the salt air was crisp against their skin. "You're doing beautifully," Alexander murmured. "They love you?" "They love who they think I am," Emma corrected. Alexander stopped walking, turning to face her. "Maybe that's who you really are. The woman I see tonight. Confident, intelligent, warm. That's not an act." Emma's breath caught. "Alexander, don't. We can't blur those lines. You said it yourself. This is business." "Is it?" he challenged, stepping closer. "Because when you defended me to Victoria, when you charmed my mother, when you look at me like you are right now, it doesn't feel like business." Emma's heart pounded. They were walking into dangerous territory, the kind that could shatter their carefully constructed arrangement. "We have an agreement," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Alexander reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Agreements can be amended." Before Emma could respond, Patricia called back to them, breaking the spell. "You two lovebirds coming? James wants to show you his yacht." The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of activities, designed to test their compatibility. Sailing, tennis, elaborate brunches, where every gesture was observed and catalogued. By Sunday afternoon, Emma was exhausted from the constant performance. But as they prepared to leave, James pulled Alexander aside for a private conversation, while Patricia walked Emma to the car. "I'm going to tell you something, dear," Patricia said quietly. "In all the years I've known Alexander, through all the women who've pursued him, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Whatever started this relationship, what you have now, is real. Don't let fear or pride destroy it." Emma's eyes burned with unshed tears. If only Patricia knew the truth, that in less than a year, this would all be over, that the affection she saw was just excellent acting. Or was it? The drive back to the city was silent, both of them processing the weekend. Finally, Alexander spoke. "The deal is secured. James approved the merger. You did it, Emma. You convinced them." He sounded pleased, but also something else. Sad, maybe. Emma stared out the window. "That's good. That's what we wanted." But her voice was flat, emotionless. The success felt hollow. At the penthouse, Sophie was bursting with news. "I got into Columbia," she shrieked, waving an acceptance letter. "Early admission for the spring semester." Emma hugged her sister tightly, tears finally spilling over. This was why she was doing this. For Sophie's future. Alexander congratulated Sophie warmly, insisting they celebrate with champagne. As they toasted Sophie's success, Emma caught Alexander watching her with an unreadable expression. Later, after Sophie had gone to bed, Emma found him in his office, staring at documents. "The first payment will be in your account tomorrow," he said without looking up. 500,000, as agreed. The businesslike tone stung after the intimacy of the weekend. "Thank you," Emma said stiffly. She turned to leave, but Alexander's voice stopped her. "Emma, this weekend." He paused, struggling for words. "What we said on the beach, maybe we should talk about it." Emma turned back slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What's there to talk about?" "We both know what this is. The Morrisons bought the act. The deal is done. We should be celebrating our success, not complicating things with feelings that don't matter." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. Alexander stood, moving around the desk toward her. "Don't they matter? Can you honestly tell me you feel nothing when I touch you?" He reached out, his fingers grazing her wrist, and Emma's pulse jumped. Can you tell me your heart doesn't race when we're close? He stepped nearer, backing her against the door. Can you tell me you haven't thought about what it would be like if this were real? Emma's breath came in short gasps. Stop, she whispered. Please. You're the one who set the rules. Separate bedrooms, separate lives. This is a business arrangement, remember? Alexander's hands came up to frame her face. I remember everything. I remember the way you looked in that burgundy dress. I remember how you stood up to my mother. I remember the fire in your eyes when you put Victoria in her place. That was all acting, Emma insisted, but her voice shook. Alexander's thumb traced her cheekbone. No, it wasn't. And neither is this. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met, soft at first, then with growing hunger. Emma's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed warnings. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. Tell me you didn't feel that, he challenged. Emma closed her eyes, summoning every ounce of strength she had. It doesn't matter what I felt. In 11 months, this ends. You'll go back to your life. I'll go back to mine. Getting involved emotionally will only make it harder. She slipped out from between him and the door, fleeing to her bedroom before her resolve could crumble. Behind her closed door, she pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the burn of his kiss. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of when she'd insisted on that third condition. Lies becoming truth. Fiction becoming real. The next morning, Alexander was gone before Emma woke. A note on the kitchen counter explained he'd been called to London for emergency meetings. The distance was a relief and a disappointment in equal measure. Emma threw herself into her role, attending gallery openings and charity lunches, building the network expected of Alexander Cross's fiancée. Sophie noticed the change immediately. He kissed you, didn't he? She said one evening, as they ate takeout in the massive dining room. Emma nearly choked on her pad thai. What makes you think that? Sophie rolled her eyes. You've been moping for 3 days. You check your phone constantly, and you touch your lips when you think no one's looking. It was a mistake, Emma said firmly. We got caught up in the moment. It won't happen again. Sophie studied her sister with wise eyes. Em, I know you think you're protecting yourself, but what if this is real? What if you're throwing away something amazing because you're scared? Of course I'm scared, Emma exploded. I'm scared of falling for someone who's paying me to pretend. I'm scared of what happens when the year ends and I have to walk away. I'm scared that I'm not really good enough for his world, and everyone knows it but him. The admission hung in the air between them. Sophie reached across the table, taking Emma's hand. You've always been the brave one, Emma. After Mom and Dad died, you held us together. You sacrificed everything for me. Maybe it's time to be brave for yourself, too. Emma squeezed her sister's hand, but didn't respond. Being brave for Sophie was easy. Being brave with her own heart was terrifying. Alexander returned from London 3 days later, looking exhausted. Emma was in the living room, reading contracts Richard had sent over about her fictional gallery. She looked up when he entered, their eyes meeting across the room. The air immediately felt charged. How was London? She asked, trying for normalcy. Productive. The European division is expanding. He loosened his tie, a gesture Emma found distractingly attractive. How are things here? Emma gestured to the stack of society magazines on the coffee table, all featuring their engagement announcement. We're apparently the couple of the year. 3 wedding planners have already reached out. Alexander sat down across from her, maintaining careful distance. About what happened before I left. Emma held up her hand. We don't need to discuss it. It was a momentary lapse. We're both under a lot of pressure playing these roles. Things got confused. Is that what you really think? Alexander asked quietly. That it was just confusion? Emma met his gaze steadily, even as her heart raced. It has to be. For both our sakes. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. If that's what you want. The next few weeks fell into a careful routine. They attended public events together, played their parts perfectly, and maintained polite distance in private. But the tension never dissipated. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every moment of forced intimacy for the cameras was torture. Emma found herself living for the brief moments when Alexander's guard would drop and she'd glimpse the man beneath the businessman. Like the morning she found him teaching Sophie chess, patiently explaining strategy, while Sophie peppered him with questions. Or the evening he came home to find Emma crying over a photo album of her parents, and he simply sat beside her, offering silent comfort. Or the night they worked together to host their first dinner party, moving around each other in the kitchen with surprising synchronization. "We make a good team," Alexander said as they cleaned up afterward, their guests gone. Emma smiled sadly. "Yeah, we do." The unspoken "too bad it's temporary" hung between them. That night, unable to sleep, Emma found herself at the piano Alexander had bought after learning she played. She let her fingers find the keys, playing a melancholy melody her mother had taught her. She didn't hear Alexander approach until he sat beside her on the bench. Without speaking, he began to play a harmony, their hands dancing around each other on the keys. When the song ended, they sat in silence, shoulders touching. "My mother would have liked you," Emma whispered. "Not the fictional curator, but the real you." Alexander turned to look at her. "Why?" Emma smiled softly. "Because you're kind when no one's watching. Because you treat Sophie like family, not an obligation. Because underneath all that armor, you have a good heart." Alexander's hand covered hers on the keys. "Emma, But she stood quickly, breaking the moment. "It's late. We should sleep." The next morning brought unexpected drama. Victoria Pemberton had given an exclusive interview to a gossip magazine, claiming Alexander had stolen Emma from his best friend, David Chen, the fictional ex-boyfriend. The story was everywhere, painting Emma as a gold-digging social climber who'd betrayed a good man for a richer one. Alexander was furious. "I'll bury her," he said, pacing his office like a caged predator. "I'll destroy her father's company. Make sure she never—" Emma caught his arm, stopping his tirade. "No. We handle this smart, not angry." She pulled out her phone, calling Richard. "We need David Chen to make a statement." Within hours, they'd crafted a response. A fake social media account for David Chen posted congratulations to the happy couple, explaining that he and Emma had parted amicably months before she met Alexander, and he wished them well from Tokyo. The story died as quickly as it had started, but the stress had taken its toll. That evening, Emma found Alexander on the terrace with a bottle of scotch, staring at the city lights. "Thank you," he said as she joined him, "for keeping me from doing something stupid." Emma accepted the glass he offered. "Partners, remember? We protect each other." Alexander studied her in the dim light. "Is that all we are? Partners?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibility. Emma took a sip of scotch, buying time. "Alexander, in 6 months, this ends. Your company gets its merger. I get financial security for Sophie. We both get what we wanted." Alexander's jaw clenched. "What if what I want has changed?" Emma's heart stopped, then resumed at double speed. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Alexander set down his glass and moved closer. "What if I don't want it to end? What if I want to make this real?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You don't mean that. You're just caught up in the performance. Once the year is over, You'll remember why you wanted a fake relationship instead of a real one. You don't know what I want, Alexander said, frustration evident in his voice. Maybe I didn't know either, until you walked into my life and turned everything upside down. He reached for her, but Emma stepped back. I can't do this, she said, her voice breaking. I can't let myself believe this is real, only to have you realize it was all just pretend. I won't survive it. She fled inside, leaving Alexander alone on the terrace. In her room, she muffled her sobs in a pillow, knowing Sophie would hear otherwise. She'd fallen in love with him, completely, irrevocably in love. And in 6 months, she'd have to walk away with $500,000 and a shattered heart. The next morning, a crisis at Alexander's Hong Kong office required his immediate attention. He'd be gone for 2 weeks. The distance was both a relief and agony. Emma threw herself into her fictional career, actually visiting galleries, learning, networking. She was becoming the woman she pretended to be. On the 10th day of Alexander's absence, Eleanor Cross invited Emma to lunch. Alone. Emma arrived at the exclusive restaurant with her guard up, expecting another interrogation. Instead, Eleanor looked tired, almost vulnerable. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. Emma blinked in surprise. When Alexander first introduced you, I was suspicious. He'd never brought anyone to meet me before, not seriously, and you appeared so suddenly, right when the Morrison deal required a wife. Eleanor's sharp eyes studied Emma. I know my son, Miss Harper. This arrangement, whatever it started as, it's become something more, hasn't it? Emma's throat tightened. Mrs. Cross. But Eleanor held up a hand. I've watched him over these past months. He's different. Lighter. More like the boy he was before his father died. Before the weight of the empire fell on his shoulders. That's because of you. She reached across the table, covering Emma's hand with her own. I don't care how this started. I care about how it ends. Don't break my son's heart. Emma felt tears threatening. What if he breaks mine? Eleanor's expression softened. Then he's a fool. But I don't think he will. Alexander doesn't give his heart easily. But when he does, it's completely. She stood to leave, then paused. The Morrison wedding clause expires in 6 months. After that, there's nothing keeping you here except what you both choose. Remember that. That evening, Alexander called from Hong Kong. His voice was warm, intimate across the distance. I miss you, he said simply. Emma closed her eyes, gripping the phone. How's the crisis? She deflected. Handled. I'll be home in 3 days. Home. The word sent a shiver through her. Alexander, your mother came to see me. Silence, then. What did she say? She knows. About our arrangement. Or at least suspects. Emma could hear Alexander's sharp intake of breath. She also said she doesn't care. She just doesn't want either of us to get hurt. The weight of unspoken words pressed between them. It might be too late for that, Alexander said quietly. Before Emma could respond, he continued. I have to go. The board is waiting. We'll talk when I get back. 3 days later, Emma waited nervously at the penthouse. Sophie was at a friend's place studying, giving them privacy for the conversation Emma knew was coming. When Alexander walked through the door, looking exhausted, but gorgeous in his rumpled suit, her heart leaped. Without thinking, she ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. He caught her, holding her tight against him. God, I missed you, he murmured into her hair. Emma pulled back, remembering herself. Sorry, I was worried. You sounded so tired on the phone. Alexander's hands framed her face. Emma, we need to talk, really talk. No more dancing around this. They sat on the couch, facing each other. Alexander took her hands. When I proposed this arrangement, I thought I was in control. I thought I could keep it purely business. But from that first night, when you stood up to me about your conditions, when you insisted on protecting us both from complications, I knew you were different. Emma's heart raced as he continued. Every day since then, you've surprised me. Your strength, your loyalty, your kindness, the way you've made this cold penthouse feel like a home, the way you've brought Sophie into our lives and made us feel like a family. Emma, I'm in love with you, not the curator, not the role you're playing. You. Tears streamed down Emma's face. Alexander. He squeezed her hands. I know you're scared. I know this wasn't the plan. But plans change. What we have is real, and I'll spend the rest of our contract time proving it to you if that's what it takes. And when the year is up, I want you to stay. Not because of money or obligations, but because you love me too. Emma couldn't speak through her tears, so she did the only thing that felt right. She kissed him, pouring all her fear, hope, and love into the connection. When they broke apart, she whispered, I love you too. I've been fighting it for months, but I love you, and it terrifies me. Alexander pulled her into his lap, holding her close. Then be terrified with me. We'll figure it out together. Emma laughed through her tears. What about the contract? Alexander smiled. We'll honor it until the year is up, then we'll tear it up and start over. A real relationship, no contracts, no obligations, just us. And Sophie? Emma asked. Alexander's expression softened. Sophie is family. She stays as long as she wants. Forever, if that's what you both choose. Emma kissed him again, feeling the walls she'd built crumbling. So what now? Alexander grinned, looking younger than she'd ever seen him. Now, we stop pretending. The world thinks we're in love. Let's show them they're right. And as he kissed her again, Emma realized that sometimes the best truths start as the most beautiful lies. Their love story might have begun as fiction, but it had become the most real thing in both their lives. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments on a scale from 0 to 10. What's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.